All right, we'll kick off now. Welcome everybody. We're very pleased and excited to have you here at our launch event. This is a culmination of a very long journey and has involved a lot of people in sort of getting to this point. So there are the sort of the team from Rockefeller Foundation, Ashvin, Joseph Cassidy, who's on the call with us, Natalie Oliver and Jide, Salim Fakir, who is the executive director of African Climate Foundation, and the team from ACF, Sahele and Zara, Rose Matiso and Katie Arth from E4 Energy for Growth Hub and their teams. And so this has been a very interesting and long journey, and so it's a big day for us. My name is Steve Nichols. I am a relatively recent joiner to this journey and have been recruited to lead the African Energy Futures program and implement what has been a carefully laid plan from the rest of the team. And really, given that energy is so critical to development, our mission at AEF is to strengthen the capacity for Africa energy planning and modeling. And we believe that doing this will result in better enabling environments and therefore better investment frameworks and therefore better development outcomes. But it is also important that we as Africans lead this journey and are given the opportunity to lead. And so this is also very much about building a community of researchers and energy specialists across Africa who can engage on energy planning. And so today is really an invitation for all of you to join us in this mission. No matter your backgrounds, while many of you here are for the call for proposals, this community that we need to develop needs to involve academics, business, government, civil society, all of society really, because energy planning and development needs all of us to engage. And so we hope that you will join us as part of this community. The hubs that we will form over time will need our support and our participation. Africa is often cited as the sort of least developed region in the world. And really working together, we can change that. And that's our goal here. So we have a wonderful program for you today to help us explore the energy landscape across Africa and also to understand the role of Africa Energy Futures, the hubs that we will form, and sort of the political and economic context in which we operate. Of course, we will share the details of our call for proposal with you later on in the program. But first up is Dan and Stephanie from the International Energy Agency, who are going to do a quick summary of their work and findings on the work. Second, we will have a panel that will talk about the origins of AEF, how we came to this idea, why we think these things are important. And then I'll come back and wrap up at that point with the call for proposal details, a little more extra details about AEF and some of the up and coming things. So you're all very welcome. As of the start of this event, we had 500 people registered for the event from 59 countries around the world, 86% of which were from 40 countries across Africa. Once again, you're all very welcome. We're excited to engage with you. Just on a protocol basis, please use the Q&A to ask questions. It will be impossible for us to monitor a really big chat. And also the Q&A means that we can get back to you after the event if we aren't able to get to all the questions. Without much ado, I'm going to hand over to Dan and Stephanie from IEA to take us through an initial presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve. So while my colleague Dan will be putting the slides online, just to say that we are very happy to be here and really happy to present our work and the energy modeling that we do here at the International Energy Agency, where we model the globe and the overall energy system sector. We have been also working with African countries for a while. I mean, we had published so far 3 African Energy Outlook. The first was in 2014. Then we had a specific one in 2019 where we had specific modeling for 10 countries in Africa. And then the latest one was in 2022 that we coded, in fact, with my colleague Dan present here. So I will, and with Dan, we will cover, some of the key findings that we had from the World Energy Outlook 2025 that we released on the 12th of November, and then we'll really dive into specific Africa pieces, so notably from the WEO, but also from other analysis that we are working especially for Africa. So let me start maybe by highlighting the fact that there is no single storyline about the future of energy. And this is why the World Energy Outlook, and this is not only the case for this year's Outlook, but for many years, this is why the World Energy Outlook presents multiple scenarios. And while all these scenarios differ in various ways, there are also commonalities across those scenarios. But a reminder, for everyone that are aware or less aware of the work that we are doing at the IEA, none of our scenarios is a forecast. What we are really exploring with these scenarios are the implications of policy, of technology, and market trends. And this year we have expanded the range of scenarios as the uncertainties in the economy and also in energy policies have widened. We have, every year we are carefully reviewing what's happening in the policy space. And since the start of this year, we have detailed at least 42 countries putting in place or changing regulation. We hope that together, these multiple scenarios that we explore in the World Energy Outlook 2025 give a good basis for discussion and decision for governments, but also for industries and all stakeholders involved in the energy sectors. So during our presentation, we will mention those 4 scenarios. So we have 2 exploratory scenarios with different policy settings. So the current policy scenarios, which is anchored in today's enacted laws and measures, and which takes a cautious view on technology deployments such as renewables, but also electric vehicles, energy efficiency improvements in the buildings or in the industry sectors. And we have another exploratory scenario, which is the stated policy scenarios, where we also consider policies under consideration, but exclude aspirational policies such as long-term net zero target or NDCs by 2035. We are also updating our net zero by 2050 pathway, and we will present some of the findings for this scenario in the presentation. But we have also a new scenario which presents a new roadmap to achieve universal access to electricity and clean cooking. And my colleague Dan will dive a bit more into this specific scenario, which is particularly relevant for Africa. So first, let me start, by giving a first picture of the drivers that we need to consider when we are talking about global energy modeling and how the future of energy may evolve. So it's really useful for us to start by understanding why we need energy in the future and in which form, what we need it for, and who will need it. So as you can see, one of the first driver that we use for our energy modeling is GDP. This is really the basics for us. And economic growth will increasingly be driven, as you can see here, by the service sector, by digital, by financial, by healthcare, which, all these sectors have the commonality to rely much more on electricity than any other field. Industrial production is also growing, especially advanced manufacturing, which drive also industrial energy use, but again, primarily fueled by electricity. In terms of demographics, we are also witnessing important demographic shifts. Then if you can click, China has reached a peak population, and by 2035, it is expected to have around 50 million fewer people than today, so in China, reaching the demographic structures seen in many advanced economies such as Japan and Italy. China was really driving energy trends for the past decade, and we are now seeing passing of the baton to other emerging economies led by India, Southeast Asia, and also joined by countries in the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa. So collectively, all these countries, which will drive energy demand growth in the future. China accounted in the past decade for more than half of global oil and gas demand and 60% of electricity demand growth since 2010. Of course, I mean, we have mentioned a bunch of countries, and no country in our projections come close to replicating China's energy trajectory on their own. So this shift is reflected in multiple indicators. So, for example, between 2000 and 2010, advanced economies accounted for half of the growth in the global car fleet. In the decade that followed, China alone did the same. And between today and 2035, half of the growth in the global car fleet comes from emerging and developing economies outside of China. We know that the ownership of car is very low in some countries, especially in Africa, and we see that with increasing wealth, we see those ownership growing in the future, but also with the growing population. We see, I mean, as we can see on the latest figure, that we will have not only more cars, but also additional requirement for data centers. For example, energy for data centers has already doubled over the past decade and are expected to double again by 2035. We see also similar growth for air conditioning. Space cooling is definitely a driver of future energy and especially electricity demand growth up to 2035 and even for later. There are many people living in regions of the world where cooling is needed. And across, I mean, all these drivers, the communities is really pointing to the direction that there is a shift, a slow shift from China, which was really in the driving seat for energy demand growth, to other regions such as India, Southeast Asia, but also regions in Africa and Latin America. And there is definitely a need and an increasing need for electricity to fuel all these economies, notably with the link to air conditioning. And the growth, as I said, so the age of electricity for us is already there. The growth of electricity demand has been already strong for years, but we see that this growth will continue. Oil and gas will still be used, but electricity demand growth is spectacular and really at the forefront of the energy system. For the moment, we see that electricity accounts for only around 20% of final energy consumption, but it's really the key source of energy for sectors accounting already today for over 40% of the global economy. So across all our scenarios, we see electricity demand accelerating significantly. Electricity demand growth from now to 2035 is nearly the same between the STEPS and CPS, although we have differences in terms of electrification on the one hand, but also for energy efficiency on the other hand, so which explains that one of the effects can offset the other. And we see that most, I mean, of this growth will happen across regions. For example, in advanced economies, electricity demand was sluggish over the past decade, really being flat, but now we see that it will be starting to grow significantly in the coming decade. China, which is already very much electrified, continues on its path for increased electrification across all sectors, especially transport, where there is a surge of EV sales, but also for buildings with a big rollout of heat pumps, and of course in industry, where electricity plays an important role for clean tech manufacturing. In emerging and developing economies, we see also new uses driving demand, including cooling, including also data centers, but also electric vehicles. In some region, we see also that desalination will play a role in driving electricity demand growth. This is notably the case for Middle East, but also in other areas of the world where water become scarce. As I said, we have also other scenarios. So we have also the net zero scenario where electrification is also one of the key lever to reduce emissions in the end-use sectors, and demand grows 50% more than in the STEPS or CPS by 2035 in this scenario. Of course, having such a surge in electricity demand has also implications on the supply side, and on this aspect, we see that all low emission technologies are growing, really led by solar PV, as you can see on this figure, due to cost competitiveness, but also policy support that are present in over 140 countries, and the fact that 80% of total final consumption growth is happening in countries with excellent solar resources, which is in sharp contrast to what we were seeing in the past. We see also other low emissions technologies growing, so wind, hydro, bioenergy, geothermal, but also nuclear are growing. Nuclear is making a strong comeback, with generation being a third higher by 2035, with plans to expand nuclear in more than 40 countries, and with already 70 gigawatts under construction today. Natural gas is also growing in many markets, including in the United States, but also Middle East, and more growth coming from Asian market. Coal, which is the largest source of electricity today, peaks before 2030 due to competition from renewables and cheaper gas in some regions. Of course, changing power systems are also reshaping electricity security, and power systems, given the surge of renewables, are becoming more variable, increasing the need for flexibility. And we have seen that cyber attacks have already tripled over the past 4 years, and extreme weather has affected already over 200 million families last year. So this is just to shed light on the fact that we will require more dispatchable capacity across technologies, and that's what is reflected in the figure on the right-hand side, where we see the fact that power capacity dispatchable power capacity is growing across our scenarios in both the CPS and the STEPS. Finally, there was a lot of interest in oil demand recently, and we had a lot of questions also on the differences between our two exploratory scenarios, so the CPS and the STEPS. In the CPS, which sees oil demand rising to 113 million barrels per day by mid-century, and between the STEPS, which flattens for oil consumption around the end of this decade. So today, the world consumes, as you can see here in this figure, around 100 million barrels per day. Some sectors see growth across all scenarios, so led by industry, notably for petrochemical feedstocks, and this is the case even in the net zero scenario, But we see also growth from the aviation and shipping sector by 2035. But we see also that some sector see a decline across our scenario, which is the case for power, but also for heating in buildings, where definitely there are some substitution with natural gas, renewables, but also electricity. The major difference that we have between our scenario is coming from road transport. In CPS, we have little change over the next 10 years, while in the case of the STEPS, we see a decline of oil consumption in road transport by 2035. And this is clearly driven by electric vehicles in some countries like China new car sales are already 50% electric, and this is projected to rise to over 90% in all scenarios, given their competitiveness vis-à-vis IC vehicles. We see EVs growing for many modes, so this includes notably and not only cars but also buses, 2, 3-wheelers, and freight transport, especially in the case of China. In Europe, we see also a big, strong, which is driven by policies, but elsewhere in the CPS, we have assumed a slower electrification, which explain the major difference between our two scenarios. Of course, we include also additional factors such as fuel efficiency policies, but also plastics recycling, which will have an impact on the numbers that you can see for the petrochemicals industry. But clearly, the primary drivers that matter for projections of oil demand is clearly electric vehicles for the road transport sector. And I'll give it now to Dan to further explore more the access story that we have across our scenarios.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I think all of those trends, I see some questions in the chat around how does this connect to the application process? And I think really the intention here is to give you the big macro picture of what is on energy policy makers' minds, both in Africa, but also from other countries that are interacting, providing investment, development assistance, et cetera, that this is all really important to make sure that your applications are connecting with real world themes and the topics du jour of different policymakers. So I think this is really helpful to think about and incubate into this. We added a new scenario this year that I think is incredibly relevant and we have detailed modeling on Africa that should be hopefully informative on some of the projects that people might be taking forward. We obviously know that access to electricity and clean cooking are targets embodied in SDG 7 and are some of the top issues on energy policy in Africa today. We also know that this is connected deeply with affordability. And what we're actually seeing is globally, there's been tons of progress recently on clean cooking and electricity. But in recent years, particularly around electricity, we're seeing some of these trends stalling out. And the latest tracking from the IEA saw that for the 4th year in a row, basically progress on extending electricity access has stalled due to a number of factors, but most notably utility strains on their finances and sort of needing to find a new mode to progress this. So with that in mind, and knowing that this is a top policymaker issue, the IEA wanted to think a little bit between some of the different scenarios we have, ones that are very ambitious and reaching SDG 7 as a target. I know this is a common question here is, we have targets, do we take those as a given, or do we look at current trends? But there's sometimes an important middle ground. And so what we wanted to do with this new access scenario is exploring the best fast progress we've seen in other parts of the world. If we were to recreate that in every country, we saw them accelerate to these paces of progress. We see them sort of make steady progress. And then that last mile, we start seeing tapering off. If we did everything right, what would be possible in terms of achieving universal access for all? And doing this country by country assessment, we were able to see that we could close the electricity gap by around 2035 and the clean cooking gap by around 2040. Now, this requires an acceleration in the number of people we are connecting globally. On clean cooking, this is around a 40% increase. In electricity access, it's much further. Now, underneath this, though, we know that the acceleration needs to happen most pointedly in sub-Saharan Africa, where we see a strong acceleration between 4- and 6-fold, both for clean cooking and electricity. Now, the solutions that are most suited, we again wanted in this scenario to take a very pragmatic lens, and knowing that affordability is a key policymaker concern and constraint, we did detailed geospatial analysis to understand what is the most accessible, affordable, and preferred solutions by different consumers. So things that were within their means were prioritized, where they had flexibility between different options that they could afford, choosing the one that is most preferred from a convenience perspective, a health perspective and an environmental perspective is what was prioritized there. So happy to take you through some of the key findings and how we did this specifically in Africa. So with clean cooking, we started with a mapping of where everyone lacked access to clean cooking today. And this is some modeling that we did with our compatriots at KTH. And additionally, we then added on looking at where all key infrastructure laid across the continent today and understanding that these pieces of infrastructure are crucial for lowering delivery costs to different consumers and making sure that these can be expanded in these key markets. And then additionally, we also looked at the distribution facilities. So these were the ones you saw before were more upstream facilities. These ones here are looking at the locations of fuel distribution facilities and their density, and then also the reliability of the electricity network today. This all shaped sort of what solutions would be possible from clean cooking and also informed the affordability assessment. So using that affordability selection and going kilometer by kilometer, square kilometer by square kilometer to understand each region's ability to pay in terms of income, but also the cost of these different technologies. We saw that LPG is the leading solution in terms of the providing access in the near term on this trajectory in the access scenario. Electricity around 17%, looking at these urban and peri-urban areas where reliability is high today and costs higher upfront income or higher incomes to afford the upfront costs associated with that. But we also have modern solid bioenergy, biogas, bioethanol, and a little bit of natural gas that all play a role in these different contexts here. All of these solutions are clean cooking solutions. All of them help reduce, improve health outcomes. This would avert nearly 600,000 premature deaths each year in Africa by 2040. Additionally, it reduces emissions. All of these, including LPG, reduce emissions on net by reducing the amount of uncombusted methane released by burning unsustainable biomass, as well as also deforestation-related emissions as well. Now, turning to electricity access, what we see as well is a similar approach, looking at what are the least cost solutions that reach a minimum bar of access provision, looking at those across the continent, and we map this today. Over nearly 45%, so 42% of those connections would be grid based on our assessment. Many grids play a role in dense areas, but more remote where grid infrastructure may take a little bit longer to extend to. And standalone systems represent around 27%, with the vast majority of those being renewably powered. So these are sort of a snapshot of where we see this progressing. One thing that we're commonly seeing in terms of recent trends is off-grid systems, solar home systems, have really surged in terms of sales. But the reality is most of this increase is in small solar home systems that do not reach the minimum level of access as defined by the IEA or above a tier 0 in the World Bank multi-tier framework system. So really a key focus on this is not just providing those as crucial and integral near-term solutions, but how do we also make sure that this can afford rising electric demand in these households. One last aspect that we think is super crucial going forward, and I encourage you to think about this in your proposals, is thinking about how productive uses play a role here. What we're actually seeing from our tracking is that the average electricity consumption per capita is on the decline in Africa, where other success stories have actually seen as electricity access is extended, this index climbing. What is going on there? Part of that is a strong focus on utilities and connecting households, but not trying to give the means to energize agriculture, small industries, et cetera, that can actually create the financial returns that allow people to pay for those that energy. What we're seeing is otherwise a system in which the economic development is not occurring in parallel, and this leaves households being able to afford a very little amount of energy, usually around 1/5 the average when they first connect compared to a lot of other parts of the world. The IEA worked with MIT to develop a new model that actually helps assess where these productive uses are and where these households that have a higher ability to pay may be. And it uses a degree of machine learning that takes existing data from utilities, identifying which each of those buildings, how much they consumed per month, and how much they were able to afford, and then taking other sorts of satellite imagery, internet speeds, nighttime lights, land use cover, and a few other factors, including GDP and incomes by each sort of pixel on the screen. When looking at those can help piece together this puzzle and understand and extrapolate that known utility data that you see on the far right to fill in the blanks in other places where there is no electricity access today, or there is electricity access, but no sense of how much those buildings consume. So this is a new tool, and I believe that the Energy for Growth Hub has also used this and scaled it to other parts of Africa. One area that would be really interesting is engaging local utilities to help make sure we're getting more specific analysis that is applicable in your regions. Finally, I just wanted to touch briefly on affordability, which we know is so crucial and such a focus for all policymakers around the world. We did a recent study that looked at how the energy transition impacts global energy delivery costs. Broadly, we would break these down between capital and financing costs and the cost to operate these systems. Now, going forward to 2035, when we look at today's policy, something aligned with STEPS or CPS, we would actually see these costs rise globally. This is through higher provision of energy, more households connected, et cetera. This would increase from today's levels, but also this is on net higher than it would be in a 1.5 aligned degree pathway or a net zero by 2050 pathway. Now, the key difference here, and this is the key policymaking challenge to make sure that clean energy transitions are affordable, is that in the near term, the capital costs increase quite much more rapidly in a faster transition case than today under today's policies, in which operating costs represent a larger share. And this is due to greater efficiency, also a more CapEx focused renewable build out in the power sector and a higher shift to power. Now, how do you manage this and how do those costs get split and financed? This is a key policymaking question and one that we have a lot of insights in this report that could be useful for your projects and thinking about how those split between public, private, and household expenditure and who bears the burden of financing this, as well as also some of the policy tools to help address this. In that assessment of policy tools, one of the key things that the IEA has looked at is how much energy is consumed in households by decile. So naturally, as you look at these curves, the richest households consume much more than the poorest households, and those in advanced economies consume on average 3 to 4 times more than those in emerging market and developing economies. Now, when we look at what this means in terms of a share of household income, as you might expect, as in advanced economies, you see this reverse trend where the poorest households on average spend much more of their income on energy, and this includes both in the home, so electricity, natural gas, LPG in the home, but also fuel for transport. In emerging market and developing economies, with the access gap, we actually see a trend in which it is pretty linear and aligned with this. And this is a really important distinction when you are designing your energy policies. So you make sure that your support is not accruing to the richest households, but really helping support the poor households and helping manage this equity in a reasonable way. So this is another important aspect and facet of designing these that we think is particularly important to consider in the context of Africa. And so with that, I'd like to hand it back to Steve. Last word here is the IEA, as Stephanie has said, has been expanding our work a lot with Africa. We've worked with many different countries doing specific roadmaps analysis. So very happy to think and consider about partnerships here and think about how our data and our modeling can help reinforce some of the great work that you guys are doing. So with that, over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan and Stephanie. A great insight into the complexity of what we're dealing with here. And maybe Dan and Stephanie, a quick question for you. You know, as we try to build research capacity across Africa, you dealt with a whole range of topics here, trying to predict global demand, trying to work out what's happening at a sort of local household level, trying to work out affordability, capacity in the energy mix on one hand. What kind of modeling capability is needed to be thinking through all of these things, and maybe to be sort of very practical, like how big is the IEA team? How many models do you have? As we think about building our broader African capacity, what are the kinds of resource demands that we should be thinking about? Thanks.
I can take that one. So first, maybe on the modeling capacity, I mean, the team has expanded. But just to remind that on our side, I mean, we look at the global picture. So of course, you don't need to have the same capacity when you deal with the global picture or with Africa only, because the challenges and opportunities are very different across the world. And there is no need to have some modeling capacity when you will be modeling Africa as a whole. To come back to your question on how many modelers we are at DIA, I think right now we are maybe 50 modelers, and we have a global energy and climate model. So we have modelers first working on the end use side, making sure that we have up-to-date information and data on all the activities, so meaning steel production, cement demand, car ownership that I mentioned, but also air conditioners. And here, I think this is the most important aspect that you need to have also for energy modeling is good and reliable data. So on this aspect, I mean, this is for me the most important part, rather than having a complex model, but making sure that you have reliable data. So making sure that the statistics office that you will have in your country could support you there, or that you have the right partnership with some industrial association to have good information on all these industry activity drivers. Then we have colleagues working more on the power generation side, and I've seen in the chat someone asking for tidal generation. This is covered also in our model, but of course this plays a much smaller role at the global level, so this was not shown in the picture, but this is included in our projections as well. We have then colleagues working more on the supply side, and I think this is particularly relevant for Africa, so to have a good understanding on resources and reserves for oil, gas, and coal, and making sure that we have a good understanding of possible trades across countries. And then we have more like satellite model to ensure that we have a good understanding of employment, and then can deal with this topic, but also critical minerals, which is also an important aspect of our modeling today, to ensure that we have a good understanding on what the clean technology manufacturing will mean for critical minerals demand. We have also partnership with other organizations to understand air pollution aspects. So I think, I mean, your energy model can become very complex, but to build a right energy model, you need first to have a good understanding of the questions you would like to answer with this energy model, and making sure that you have the right data to answer those questions, rather than having a very complex models that will require a lot of details that you don't have access to in the end.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you. I mean, I guess making the link back to Africa Energy Futures and what we're trying to do, you know, those points about the question is really important. And so one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later in the program is what kinds of energy research questions are most pertinent in your context, right? And so a big part of the proposals that we will be requesting is defining that, and therefore the kinds of efforts and models and data that you will need to be able to answer the most pertinent questions in your country. I mean, there was a quick question in the chat about how do we define energy in this context, and it's pretty broad, right? So we're not here talking just about electricity, the point that I think Stephanie made in her opening slides. Most of the demand is coming from other uses. So perhaps you could comment on that quickly. And then Crispin also asked a question about on the access to clean cooking progress. LPG seems to be leading by a wide margin. So what does that kind of mean as a driver for things like LPG as a fossil fuel? Are we phasing that out? What are our alternatives? Thank you.
Maybe, I mean, just very quickly on the energy aspects, indeed, I mean, energy is very broad today, and it's even broader, I mean, with all the issues that we face now for energy security. I mean, energy encompasses multiple aspects, and that's something that we are trying to reflect also in our modeling, to make sure that we have an understanding of what it will mean and how it will translate on bills, for example, for consumers. So just to say, indeed, I mean, where electricity is not the only aspect that we look into our energy modeling capacity, but making sure that we have the good overview of the overall energy system and all the implications that it will entail. So not only on consumption and demand of energy, but what it will mean for investments, what it will mean for emissions, for air pollution, and for bills for consumers, among others. And I'll give the floor to Dan for clean cooking.
Perfect. Yes. No, on the point on LPG, yes, based on the assessment we provided, which I said was sort of the least cost accessible version of that, this is where we see LPG leading. Obviously, from the IEA's perspective, achieving universal access to energy is a first priority in any of our scenarios, including in the net zero. And so the ways in which we can provide this most expediently and efficiently, this is sort of what we prioritize there in terms of a just and people-centered transition. And that said, also this transition to LPG from traditional use of biomass is a net emissions reduction. I think this is really important to flag here, and there's wider agreement across the international community that LPG does really fit into this transition fuel context. And this is cited both in the latest G20 outcome as well as G7 outcomes as well, where they specifically highlight that LPG is included in this urgent effort to extend clean cooking access. So I think that's a key thing. But from an emissions perspective, it is a net reduction because you are eliminating the methane, uncombusted methane, from burning biomass in inefficient stoves, as well as also curbing deforestation, where that is also a contributing factor. So our numbers there, that sort of bears out. So I think in many ways, this has been carved out a bit as a transition fuel by the international community and something that is widely supported in Africa and beyond as an important part of the energy transition.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Stephanie. It was fascinating and interesting. We needed at least another 3 hours to go through all of this material. So perhaps we'll have a follow-up event in the new year where we can kind of dig into it a lot more and also learn a little bit more about some of those tools that you mentioned and how they might be deployed in African research hubs. I mean, there's been a lot of chat and questions around, are these hubs going to be individuals or institutions? We're going to get into that level of detail later on in the event. So I'll come back on after our panel, which is next, and explain all of that detail to you all. But then also on the comment that Dan made about collaborating and researching together, I think here also the focus will be on establishing hubs and that then can provide sort of core focus channels for the IEA team rather than them trying to support every individual researcher across Africa, which would be a tough task. So again, these hubs are a means of helping to coordinate the partnerships that we need to really think about energy development. But the panel that we're about to kick off will explore this in more detail. And so I'm going to hand over to Cassidy and invite her to introduce the panelists. There are a couple of questions still in the chat, Dan and Stephanie. If you're able to answer those as we go, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Over to you, Cassidy. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Steve, and thanks to the IEA team for the fascinating presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really exciting to be here for this important launch, and I'm excited now to spend some time talking through how the Africa Energy Futures Initiative unfolded and why we are now at this moment of launching the first hubs. At the Rockefeller Foundation, we've spent decades supporting countries across Africa to expand clean, reliable, and affordable energy. Because we know that energy is foundational to every development aspiration: jobs, industry, health, digital services. Some of our biggest bets, like our investment in the Global Energy Alliance and our partnership on the Mission 300 initiative, reflect this core belief that energy drives development. But across our years of experience, a consistent pattern became impossible to ignore. Africa's energy future was too often being shaped outside the continent. Too many countries were forced to rely on externally produced models, externally set agendas, and externally designed national plans. That left governments with plans and models lacking context, and without the homegrown analytical capacity needed to plan confidently, negotiate with strength, and chart their own long-term energy and industrial strategies. And so we are particularly proud to support the Africa Energy Futures Initiative, a structural solution that shifts power to African experts, strengthens local institutions, and invests in the next generation of analysts. This first call for proposals is a major milestone, and now I'd like to unpack how the initiative emerged, what problems it seeks to solve, and how the hubs can transform the way that decisions are made around energy planning across the continent. And so with that, I would like to ask my fellow panelists to join me on video. We have with us three incredible leaders in this space who have spent a lot of time thinking through capacity building, energy planning, modeling, how governments actually use these plans. And so I'm really pleased to have with us Rose Matiso, Senior Advisor for the Energy for Growth Hub and Founder and Executive Director of the African Tech Futures Lab, as well as Salim Fakir, who is Executive Director of the African Climate Foundation and is a global thought leader on the intersection of climate and development. And finally, Maren Tesfa-Michael, who is the Operations Director at the African Institute for Sustainable Energy and Systems Analysis and was previously Director of the World Resource Institute's Africa Energy Program. Great to have you all here, and thanks for taking the time. Rose, let's start with you. You helped diagnose this problem years before the initiative itself took off. When you look back, what was the moment, what was the evidence that made it clear to you that Africa needed its own modeling institutions rather than external support?
Yeah, thank you so much for this invitation. It's a real, my colleagues and myself from the Energy for Growth Hub are extremely proud to be part of this moment. So I think the origin for this, I remember clearly, was actually, if I'm to put, I've always been very interested in African capacity, and so have my colleagues, but if I'm to put like a kind of 0.0 for this initiative, was during COP21, which was, I think, when we were at peak net zero mania and everybody had a net zero plan, whether you were an oil company or a fashion business, you went to Glasgow and you announced your net zero plan. And we were my colleagues and I at the Energy for Growth Hub, we were really curious about, basically, this is a paradigm that is really shaping how countries are making decisions and companies and organizations about the future. And, you know, we were asking some questions about what does a paradigm like this, does it mean for an African country? How do you set a target? How do you make it meaningful? And so as we were uncovering that big picture process, we actually landed on the idea that analysis, scenario planning and modeling is really this kind of hidden engine that shapes, from the background, it shapes decisions, right? And so like our IA colleagues said rightfully, these models and scenarios, they're not a forecast, but they do help put a vision of the future. Do this, not that. If you do this, this will happen. If you do that, you know, and there's a lot of analysis data that goes into that. And so we were really curious about how, if you're an African country, an African decision maker, how can you make these decisions about we'll pursue this option versus that if you don't have those engines of analysis behind you? And so that was it, was like, if everyone, can you articulate a meaningful net zero plan? And so I think we brought together multiple working groups of experts, majority African experts, to help us unpick this, to help us understand the modeling space, because sometimes in the energy policy space and climate policy space, which many of us are from, we don't really understand as deeply the modeling and analysis scenarios. And actually over this past few years, I've gotten to know colleagues at places like the IEA well, to kind of understand this black box to us of energy modeling and analysis. We talked to over 100 experts all over Africa. We surveyed over 100 initiatives. We brought together, we had a co-design workshop that Rockefeller hosted us at Bellagio, and included, you know, colleagues like Salim and others from ACF, to just try and connect the big picture policy ambition, which is how can we articulate meaningful, context relevant energy plans and trajectories we are trying to connect that big question with the kind of the details and the kind of the nerdy details of energy modeling and how we bring them together. So I think that at the end of that whole process, what we landed on as a solution, and there are many solutions. So I think many organizations have done many different types of things, including organizations like Rockefeller, organizations like ACF, organizations like the African Development Bank. You know, sometimes organizations work with governments and provide, you know, to help them co-create their plans. And, you know, there are many, many different modalities, but the AEF, we decided to focus on a long-term modality, which sits alongside all of the other ways that people are trying to solve this. And the long-term modality is around anchoring independent expertise. So this is not a short term, it's not, let's just help this country produce one report. Sometimes helping a country produce one report is what you need in the moment. Like, if, you know, but for us, we're like, what is the long-term solution? And we found, when we looked across different markets and we did analysis in different countries in Europe and South Asia, we looked at South Africa, which is one of the more advanced energy modeling regions in Africa. And what we found over and over, countries that are able, have a lot of kind of independent capacity for energy transition modeling, are able to be reactive and adaptable, have really strong energy modelers that are independent. And so they sit in universities or they sit in think tanks, and there's a rich ecosystem of them. And they are supporting government as consultants or as contributors. They are teaching the next generation of modelers. They are engaging in academic conversations and the state of the art in modeling. They are expert advisors at the IEA. They're, you know, and so that these independent experts have a very strong multi-purpose function in the ecosystem, and that we just need to support more of those in Africa, that we just need to have a stronger pool of those experts that are the glue in the ecosystem, you know? And so on one hand, they're teaching and training. On the other hand, they're consulting for the other government. On the other hand, they're, you know, they're just kind of, they're in academic conferences about how we get better data. And so they're just this hidden glue. And I think this initiative is trying to zoom in on that modality that has been underserved.
Fantastic. So cool to hear how this came together and all the different thought leaders and experts who weighed into shaping this initiative. Maren, let me bring you in on this, because Rose spoke about the particular expertise on hand here. You've worked closely with governments on their energy transition planning and modeling. When governments are making decisions about what their grid looks like, industrial zones, investment type pipelines, what types of modeling outputs and scenarios are most needed? What actually shifts a conversation, informs a decision? And how is local expertise and context critical to getting the right insights to governments?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. And also, good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations to Steve and to the whole AEF team for reaching this point and about to launch this highly anticipated and also exciting initiative. So I think looking into what they're looking at, one of the most enduring challenges is the difficulty of moving from this promising technical analysis, pilot projects, and models that show what is possible in translating that into possible action on the ground. So I think most of the governments that are looking at this exciting analysis and plans and visions, they struggle with significant bottlenecks and delays in moving those plans forward. And usually I think that there are many reasons for that, but one of the things that you see in a struggle is from scaling, from implement, like effective pilots can't scale, and commitments do not always translate into execution. And so part of the explanation and part of the struggle and part of the thing that policymakers or governments are looking is not just the evidence. On the one hand, whether in some ways this evidence is sufficiently anchored in the lived realities of specific countries. And that might not even be the most important thing that they might be focused in. It's just that it becomes difficult because there is the evidence, there is the policy space, and then there is a practice place. And when these three elements come together, that space is a highly complex space, and it's shaped by institutional constraints, it's shaped by competing priorities, or that everyday politics of decision making makes this very difficult. So obviously there's always a need for that rigorous technical analysis, but I think there is also a need to invest and build in the capacity to work within the complexity that exists in this place. So for many reasons, for example, seeing the system through the perspective of historical legacies, social structures, and relations to power is an important part of understanding how to move beyond this amazing optimal analysis, technical analysis that exists on paper forward. And the other one is also what's often described as energy transition is actually in practice a set of political economic transitions that happen, that occur at multiple domains within the market space, within the industrial policy, within the planning institutions themselves. In order to move forward, they need to change some aspect of the work they do. And then there is also the increasing call and the need for social equity, which also comes into this space. So each domain kind of has different actors, different coalitions and actors competing for multiple interest and influence. Therefore, a scenario or a policy or a design that appears optimal, maybe politically unworkable or institutionally out of reach. And so the question then has become how to produce analysis that is rooted in local context and recognize the institutional and political realities within which these decisions are to be made. Hence the long-term advocacy for a political economy literacy as well as strong local research capacity being important.
Thank you, Maren. And picking up on that point around systems change, Salim, Africa Energy Futures Initiative is launching at a moment when there are multiple continental efforts that the African Climate Foundation has helped spearhead and lead, from capacity building to industrial strategy, and all of these are accelerating at the same time. How do you see the Africa Energy Futures Initiative, the modeling hubs, fitting into the broader ecosystem?
First, let me thank Steve. I think. Oh, okay. I'm just checking if the microphone was working. I wanted to thank Steve. I know, if I'm not mistaken, you started in April, and it already feels so alive, the Africa Energy Futures. There was a bit of a delay. Rose will remember that, but also enormous gratitude to Rose for the amazing effort she put into laying the foundation for the Africa Futures Hub. I have to say she did that very selflessly, and without any I think we would not have been able to get you without that. And certainly the Rockefeller Foundation and your initial support and your continued interest and depth of engagement around this work. It's very important that we have that. I wanted to just pick up on a couple of things that I think just want to relate to your question around the Africa Futures Hub and its relevance. I think in a lot of the work that we're doing in country and the region as the African Climate Foundation, we recognize that there's a big desire for increasing the enabling conditions for investment. So we are working a lot on investment platforms. Some people call them country platforms, etc. We're actually working in 10 countries. The most successful of obviously is the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which is the 12 billion deal. And as you know, Cassidy, the Rockefeller Foundation, also played a big role in that. That desire requires particularly investment platforms. Many of them are around improving access to cheaper sources of capital and being able to scale up electrification. Why electrification? Because many of these economies are, I would say, stuck in a stranded economic model, which is an enclave model, which is largely extractive and very much dependent on commodity boom and bust cycles, or at least boom cycles in order for growth. There's a lot of positive growth in the African economies, but I think what we want to have is how to link the AEF's energy planning work to long-term economic growth and development, and particularly the diversification of different countries' economies, so that they become more economically resilient. And with more economic resilience, we can deal with not only improving further investments in electrification, but also mitigating other sorts of climate risk and other risks. And Cassidy, you're also working on critical minerals and green industries, etc. So I see the important effort here is not to just commit to the least cost energy technologies and the pathways to get there, but to interlink the energy planning work with what's the best way to attract new sources of capital at lower cost for investment that can translate into economic transformation. And I would, Rose, I know you write about these things, etc. The issue is not just about energy planning and more electrification, it's about what we do with electrification. What is the ultimate purpose and broader vision for economic development that we have to hinge this together with? And I think that's really what we can bring to the table as the African Climate Foundation, because our model is around the climate development nexus. But I want to talk about you talked about capacity building and modeling. What is important is that there's both a visible capacity building. There's these experts, there's a network, they work on common problems, they embed themselves either in government or they develop capabilities in universities, etc. But there's also a hidden dimension of the capability. I think what we shouldn't miss the point about is that the AEF, with its hubs and with its spokes and sort of decentralized partners, is also playing a very important and vital coordination role across the region. So that's number one. Number two is that it's bringing experts together, not only at the regional level, but globally, to share expertise so that we can improve modeling knowledge, modeling capability, and etc. And thirdly, to keep abreast of all the latest technologies that are out there. There's a big push, for example, to push for nuclear in Africa, actually. Lots of deals are being signed up. Now, signed up deals don't mean that they necessarily going to be financed or etc. I have an agnostic view about nuclear. I mean, I say this very openly here, but I do think we can't lose sight of the fact that there are certain types of cost binding constraints that come with nuclear, especially large-scale nuclear. People are talking about small modular reactors, etc. But energy modeling helps to begin to prioritize what technology solutions make sense for a particular period and economic context, and what can be affordable and not affordable. I do think that renewables, I'm not talking about it because of climate reasons. Renewables make a lot of sense because we have vast resources. And secondly, we can build as we need and we don't have to overcapitalize. And if we do the right procurement models, we can bring the cost down. And one tool for that is, of course, investment platforms. So I don't think we should lose sight of both the visible and the hidden values of the hub and the role it will play in building, I would call, African indigenous capability that is needed, but Africa-led and globally connected is my sort of way of looking at it. Thank you.
Thanks, Salim. And I'm really glad you tied together so well how energy modeling and planning and these hubs inform the broader ecosystem and investment, et cetera, into the region. I want to come back to your question on technology, because I think that's a really important one as it relates to the hubs. But before we do that, Rose, you mentioned the example of South Africa. I wonder if you could share a bit more in the research that you did, the engagement with stakeholders that you did. What did you learn about the kinds of expertise, partnerships, incentives that need to kind of exist to make these sorts of efforts really successful in informing planning and resulting in that investment Salim spoke of? I know there are a lot of folks listening in who are thinking about putting in an application to be part of this hub network. And so what should they know about how planning has been really successful before, whether it's a case of South Africa, India, or elsewhere?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And echoing Salim and Meron here, they're basically, this is an ecosystem of multiple players with many interests. So the investment people need to make decisions, the government people need to make policy decisions or permit, like technology decisions. There are a lot of interests and players. And when we looked at a country like South Africa, for example, we found that this deep history of some energy modeling groups, so including the ESG, or now ESG, I forget the acronym, at the University of Cape Town, and a few other groups at Stellenbosch and elsewhere. Basically, their role were whenever there was an emerging paradigm. So like, if you go back to the 2000s, there was a long-term mitigation strategies, then the NDCs became a paradigm, then the net zero, and then new technologies come in. And it just, then what we saw repeatedly in our research is that the decision makers in the South African DOE, or if the World Bank is working with the government on a particular deal or to explore something, the experts that they reach to support that was always there's just an existing pool of experts in those energy modeling groups. And so they were very adaptable. So it's not that like a new paradigm, you need like an expert who's trained on making an NDC. It was the same people who have been cultivated over decades, have just been in that ecosystem and are a resource for the decision makers. So I think often for the people who are dialing in and asking questions who are probably from the expert side or the analysis side, it might seem daunting because there are very many to kind of achieve this goal of the planning to investment to economic growth and opportunity. A lot of other people are responsible for kind of getting to that promised land. But I think the insight that we learned is that experts are just having a pool of trusted experts who know their stuff, who know the local context, who are available, that the various decision makers are drawing from as different decision points come in, as different paradigms come in, as new technologies come into the picture. And so that you don't have to, for like, the nuclear example that Salim gave, you don't have to then scramble now and go to, I don't know, South Korea or US and try and find a nuclear expert to then come and tell you, that they're just people in your local ecosystem who know both this technology, they know both the local context. But then to have that pool of experts available, you have to, it's a form of infrastructure. It's a form of knowledge infrastructure that you have to invest in. They have to be housed within institutions. Those institutions need to have funding and they need to do good work, but they need to have contact with these various decision makers so that they can be a resource to them.
Yeah, great. I love that point about adaptability as a core strength for expertise and then having the networks out. Meron, what are your thoughts on this technology angle? How can hubs kind of continue to adapt to shifting environments, shifting technologies? How do they stay relevant? What would your advice be for those listening in?
So yeah, I was actually I like Rosa's adaptability approach, but it's also the same. What would be relevant is to be able to speak to the local knowledge and local expertise, local data, to be able to come with that, not only in a sense that, to do the same thing, but also even to ground these generic assumptions, high-level reality reflections and ground that with a data analysis that can avoid misjudged demand, oversized systems, and things like that. And this is the kind of data, for example, that is currently missing is from informal economies to non-monetized, monetized productive use, to seasonal demand, and even the way small businesses actually use energy. That kind of information, that kind of local expertise is crucial for making the technologies adaptable, but also making the pathways that come forward can be flexible and resilient to the pathways that we promote. And so it's about creating institutional memory. It's having the data system that is anchored in, on the ground and in reality. And it's also bringing that awareness of the political economy I was talking about earlier to make planning necessary and relevant. So overall, I think the technologies are going to be there everywhere. The capabilities are going to be there. But what is really going to be important is for the African experts to be able to design, interpret, and implement decision on their own terms. And I think bringing that is going to be an important part of it. And as the hubs are going to do, building analytical capacity grounded in local realities is important. But also the hubs, I think, have a space to not only just take whatever technology can, but also strengthen the science and policy interface, or you can call it the technology and policy, or you can call it the evidence and policy interface, to close that persistent gap that currently exists between analysis and implementation. And then also, obviously, as mentioned, there is also opportunity for cultivating this long-term human capital and leadership, by engaging at different levels of the process, or at different states from introduction of the technology, or making it adaptable and creating a flexible and resilient pathway for those technologies and capabilities to be integrated is an important part of building the leadership, the cross-generational collaboration, the interregional research network. All of this, I think, is going to be an important part of making that happen.
Great. And let me pause here just to share for our audience. If you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to put them into the chat. I know there are a lot of questions about the actual application process that will come in the next section. But if you do have questions for the panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to a couple of them. I'm hearing a number of different things that you all have identified as really key to success, to translating evidence into action, from that adaptability, the actual core expertise, the evidence and policy interface. Are there other elements that we haven't touched on that you all think are super essential to creating strong hubs, building the kind of capacity that this initiative seeks to support? Each of you have incredible experience in institution building. So wondering if there's anything we haven't touched on yet. Salim, please jump in.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to cover 3 areas that I think are very vital. Traditionally, particularly in a climate space, a lot of energy modeling has been done for purposes of polemics. Basically, people trying to defend renewables against coal or gas. But I think that and we're also living in a post-truth age, so sometimes you wonder whether even providing evidence. I think, Cassidy, I don't have to mention which part of the world, whether that is true, whether evidence does matter to people who are going to make their minds up anyway. But I do think that having it rooted in the real economy, and particularly in a continent where you have over 600 million people without energy, you got to look at trade-offs between different technology choices, because it comes down to the economics and financing. Their polemics is not going to count. It's really the evidence is going to count, and the risks associated with specific technology trade-offs. So modeling here is very important. If you can link it to an investment pathway, no investment person is going to have a post-truth moment. They are going to want to know whether making an investment in distributed generation or grid-connected capabilities is going to be better off in the longer term, or other choices. And also, with countries that are looking to improve the installed capacity of renewables, there are other costs associated, like the impacts of intermittency, and you need to be able to deal with that. Do you buy storage technologies, or do you build pump storage capacity? How do you deal with these issues? So I do think that we are moving away from, particularly on the continent, it's becoming more and more relevant from an investment point of view and decision making, and less about, I would say, the old style climate activism and advocacy, where you wanted to, and particularly in South Africa, when you deal with the integrated resource plan, which is the long-term plan for energy planning and investment, that we're not getting into debates about renewables versus nuclear or gas, but it's really about what can we finance in the current economic context, what makes sense, what's good for the economy and for the people of the country, and their evidence is needed. I just wanted to share that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, really important point, and I hope to see that this initiative helps address making sure that planning is done based on what the local context requires, rather than the political aspirations or beliefs of outsiders. Rose, Maren, anything else to add on what it means to be successful here, Rose?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say one thing, a bit more in the details of how kind of these expert networks can be built and sustained, which speaks to some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat. So, I think that in mature, kind of more mature ecosystems, there are traditional ways that these expert networks are built. You have the big universities with big grants, it's big departments, very traditional. And I think that we will have to do things differently here. And so we need to create nimble expert networks, with different types of institutions engaged. So not just traditional universities, but other types of institutions, having ways to incorporate experts across multiple institutions, incorporate them in fractional ways, So I think that the networks, we will have to take a creative approach to building expert networks. That is not just the old way of building these big mega institutions, but and including anchoring them in existing organizations. And so I think that part of the goal is for these consortia that are bidding for the hub to try and reflect kind of creative structures that try to, that don't just presume that you have an energy modeling department like MIT does, that is trying to pull together resources, including from government, from wherever, in creative ways. And I think the other part of the equation is then for funding to come in to give these kind of creatively assembled networks sustained funding to be able to kind of put up roots and deliver impact over the long term.
Yeah, fantastic. So thinking about those different creative structures. Maren, anything else from your side? And
I just wanted to add one last thing, which is the importance of also thinking in a multidisciplinary way. I think the challenges that we are looking at here in Africa is not the same as where we can create some analysis independent from other challenges that are facing, and this has been mentioned. And this is why I want to advocate one more time for thinking political economy way. And I know not everything can be coded or can be modeled into coded into an equation, but it can. When thinking about that, I think it's thinking about shaping the mindset of the modeler or the team or the group that comes together, especially if the hub is also intended to inform decision, whichever type of decision it is. To see the system through in such a way means that it encourages and creates a habit of asking certain questions that broaden not only the modeler's field of vision, but also where the solutions might be, and connecting this capability with the reality on the ground is going to require for the hub to develop a sensitivity to dynamics that the modeling itself may not be able to capture. Thank you.
fantastic. So as we close out the panel, one final question for all of you. We're 5 years down the line. It's 2030. The hubs have launched, they've expanded. We have an incredible network of expertise of local African planners and modelers. What's changed? What does planning look like? How is it differently informing all of these different dimensions that each of you have touched on? We'll do a rapid fire here. Maren, you're off mute. Can I start with you?
Yes, I will go back to what I started with. Implementable plan that actually can be actualized and that all sorts of stakeholders stand behind. I think that would be the best thing to imagine. Yeah.
Actionable plans. Great. Salim.
Sure, I think it lays the foundation for catalyzing capability in diverse institutions. That's a credible place to go to verify and to support governments in their decision making. And I think finally, that there is a cohort of new younger people who see energy planning as a career path. But more importantly, I want to stress that the relevance of the planning will become more and more important if we can link it to an investment pathway. And I think providing real economy, cases where planning, modeling, and planning experts can work in makes the AEF more relevant. Thanks.
I'd say I agree with what all the co-panelists have said. Plus, for me, I always saw success as context relevant analysis and knowledge on demand. So decision maker X, whether you're in government, you're an investor, whoever you are, you're like, somebody's hydrogen is a thing. How do I even approach this? Oh, I heard that, so-and-so institution X and has a group of people who can help me answer this quickly, or they know something, and it's just at your fingertips. You don't have to go to Rockefeller to give you a fund, to do an RFP, to find a consultant somewhere to help you answer that question. It's just, they're just people readily available who can even give you a steer. And then if you want to do something deeper, then you can go and find the different partners to give you the support to work with these and other people to do something deeper. So that knowledge is at your fingertips for all of the people who need, including, for example, people like IEA. They might be like, okay, now we're doing this new big scenario, but we need more granular information on country X. Oh, I know in that country, these experts can call, so it's just the knowledge and the analysis is embodied in people who are readily available.
Local contextual knowledge at your fingertips. Let's work towards it. Thank you all so much. This was a great conversation. Back over to you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And in fact, Cassidy, before you go, one of the questions in the chat was about, is there a potential relationship between AEF and M300? And given that's a program that you work quite closely with, it'd be interesting to get your quick thoughts on that. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is very much a link between the hubs and Mission 300, in that Mission 300 both reflects the World Bank and African Development Bank's investment pipeline to reach 300 million new connections by 2030. But it's relies on a series of energy compacts that governments have set that set targets way beyond the 300 million and also commit to a series of reforms. All of those compacts require a great deal of planning and modeling. And so those plans and models will struggle with the same kinds of things that Rose identified years ago and that we all know so well, unless the hubs are able to exist to support and ensure that there's better, more locally contextual planning and modeling to guide government. So absolutely a direct link, and we look forward as a Mission 300 partner to working with the hubs to support compact implementation.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Cassidy. Thanks also for facilitating the panel, and thanks very much to the panel. That was fascinating. So I am going to quickly run through the AEF program just to give you a sort of greater sense of that, but then also get to the part that most of you have been waiting for. I do want to say, though, that there are a lot of questions in the Q&A about the role of individuals, and I think that points to one of the very problems we're trying to solve. Is there are many individuals who have skills and expertise in energy modeling and energy implementation and planning across Africa, but they have no institutional homes. And so they struggle to be able to find their joy in implementing their expertise. And so that's part of what we're trying to do here. So running quickly through how do we see the AEF, what are we trying to do? And here is one of the sort of classic sets of statistics that help us understand the African challenge within the global context. So we know that of the 750 million people globally that do not have access to energy, 600 million of those are in Africa. Less than 3% of energy investment, particularly in renewable energy, happens in Africa. And even when people have access to energy, affordability is a primary challenge. And so the per capita consumption, average per capita consumption across Africa is less than 180 kilowatt hours a year, which is a remarkably small amount of energy when you compare to 6,500 kilowatt hours used in Europe or 13,000 in the United States. And so giving access to people in Africa is a major developmental objective and something that we need to rally behind. But we also know that of all of the papers published about African energy systems and energy in Africa, referenced by the UNFCCC, of those papers, only 2/3 of them have 2/3 of them have no African authors, right? And so a lot of this research, to a point Cassidy made earlier, is being done by external parties, often European and American universities. We also know that planning is not something that happens once off, that happens quickly. You can't do a national energy plan 3 months with a consultancy. And so what is required is these communities of researchers, as Rose was pointing out, they need to work together over time to build expertise, to build trust, and to be answering really good and accurate policy questions. And for many institutions in Africa, this is a real challenge because you don't have the long-term certainty to be able to build those tools, to be able to get the data that you need, to be able to think through the complexity of the questions and scenarios that need to be considered. And so a big part of the plan and goal of African Energy Futures is to provide some certainty to these institutions. And these institutions can then invest in training, they can invest in models, they can provide homes for many of the individuals on this call who are looking to do this kind of work. And so that's really at the core of what we're trying to do. And as has been discussed in the chat, is energy is core to development. Development is core to development, health, economic growth, job kinds of outcomes. And so there's a really strong link between what we're trying to do here and the development outcomes. And the core to all of this is capacity. And we think about capacity like our colleagues at ICESA and Miron's organization as the ability to determine your own future and implement your own future. And that is really what we're trying to build here at AEF. We're also aware that different countries start at different points. Some countries have already established institutions that have been running for a long time, that have already established relationships with their policy making and investment counterparts, and some countries do not, and they may not have very much modeling capability at all. And so over time, we will be developing support for a range of hub sizes, from emerging hubs that are still kind of building their capability to smaller hubs that we can provide some support to over time, and then ultimately what we envisage as fully funded large hubs. This call for proposals is specifically in this fully funded hub bucket, the large hubs, but over time we will be developing support and already supporting some institutions in the smaller spaces. So what do we anticipate hubs doing, and what do we anticipate African Energy Futures doing? The role of hubs is to do a couple of things: to invest in people, to train people, either students or industry or government partners, to build local models, get secure data, local relevant data, connect with policymakers, so make sure that the research is getting into the right hands. That may also include investors. To collaborate, and we'll talk a little bit more in a couple of slides about this can't be done by a single institution. And then, of course, run inclusive multidisciplinary processes. Research shows that when you involve people in the modeling process, you involve them early on in helping to think through scenarios and the kinds of questions that we're trying to answer, those research efforts are far more impactful and make their way into policy and investment options. On the other hand, what will AEF do? We are convened to support these hubs, and so we will help to coordinate funding. That's probably our main task, but we'll also help connect partners to the hub. So the example that we used earlier of International Energy Agency will help provide mentors and capacity building. So when you talk to some of these institutions, if you talk to the UCT ESRG team at UCT that Rose mentioned earlier, they built their model over 20 years. But we don't have time to do that. We need to build them a lot quicker than that. And so one of the things we'll try to do is crowd in specific training and mentors to these hubs to help them accelerate their learning journey and reach those kinds of stages quicker. We'll also provide collaboration platforms. So one of the key things that we want to do is get these hubs working together over time. So if we have hubs looking at productive use of energy in agriculture in Senegal, why can't they also be talking to people working on the same kinds of problems in Zambia and Malawi? And then the last part is trying to create access to opportunity. Can we help find specific job placements or learning opportunities for particular hub members, and so that we can help again to accelerate the learning journeys of these hubs. But to make the point that the hubs are the core. So we envisage a network of institutions that are working on energy and energy issues in their country, to Miron's point and to Salim's point, really understanding the local economic context and the development journey of their country and being very responsive to that. At the same time, strengthening the African voice in international discussions by raising these hubs up to be working together across collaboration platforms. So answering policy questions, as we sort of saw in the IEA presentation, is a complex process and requires a huge amount of tools and data and institutions working together to solve these problems. And this is a schematic of one such hub that was developed by the Presidential Climate Commission in South Africa, thinking about what do you need working together? And so you might need climate modeling, you might need macroeconomic energy, demand side modeling, like how big is this economy, what's happening to the economy, are data centers a big thing, will hydrogen be a big thing? These are all things that we have to think through over time. You might need specific capacity models on the energy side, and you will almost certainly need geospatial and production cost modeling, but you will also need to start thinking about grid modeling. And how will my grid be stable as I integrate different kinds of generation technologies? And then along that kind of main hub, there are a whole bunch of things that you need to think about. We need to be thinking about socioeconomics. We need to be thinking about things like air quality and water. We need specific sector models to be thinking about, well, what might happen in transport? How quickly can we transition from one transport mode to another? And you need microeconomic modeling. Many policymakers, once you start thinking about energy modeling, will start to want to know about employment and skills and what are the kinds of barriers to achieving these long-term development things, as well as thinking about things like poverty alleviation and inequality. We really need to understand finance. How do you finance this infrastructure, as Salim made to that point so eloquently? And then, of course, a big part of that finance discussion is how do we think about market design and market modeling? And so these are the broad set of things that we need to be making good decisions about energy planning across an economy, and we need to be able to do all of these things. Now, we don't expect a hub to be producing research in every one of these blocks, but we do have the goal for hubs to be playing a coordination function, so to be helping to build this community of practice as you journey along, recognizing what other kind of modeling skills are needed and bringing them into this community. And energy modeling is a very useful gateway into thinking about the broader modeling landscape. So once you're doing a capacity model, thinking about, well, what does my energy mix have to look like? You immediately start asking questions about, well, where is that energy? How do I think about my geospatial components? You start asking questions like, well, what does my demand look like? What is my economy going to look like over time? So then you need an economy model. And so on. And so you will go down these pathways of thinking about deeper and deeper modeling. The one pathway being, how do I think about the broader economy and investment and the enabling environment? The middle pathway here being thinking about, how do I deepen my experience of energy modeling, with market design as a key linkage between how you think about the cost of electricity supply and investment. And then, of course, there's a very complicated data path that needs to go with this. And to one of the points raised in the chat earlier, core to this is answering questions that are contextualized within your country, that are implementable and practical in your economic and socioeconomic and political economic context, which the point that Miran made. And our long-term vision is, if we can build communities of practice like this across several African countries, this is when our voice will become much more powerful, both in driving local development and investment, but also in international discussions and identifying what is needed to accelerate Africa's development. So that gives us a sense of the kinds of goals that we're trying to achieve and the context into which you will submit these proposals. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about the call for proposals. We'll talk a little bit about the inclusion criteria and eligibility criteria and what we expect to see in the proposals, but also just tell you what resources will be available to you. So I guess the first thing to share with you is we are planning a two-phased process for these proposals. We're expecting a lot of interest and are excited about the interest we've already had. We've already had over 40 different institutions across Africa register their intention to host a hub. And so that's very exciting, and we expect there will be more following today's launch and in the next few weeks. And so we can't resource-wise take full proposals from 100 different organizations. And so the two-phase process is to help manage that. So the first phase, basically between now and the end of February, is what we call the concept note phase. And we're basically requesting 5-page concept notes from each institution interested in submitting a proposal. And we would like to receive those by the 30th of January, so the first month of next year. And then we will score and rank those concept notes. We'll have them externally reviewed. We will have an assessment panel that will then make recommendations on the top 10 concept notes, who will then be directly invited to submit a proposal. We will also be able to see from these proposals where there is need, and that will inform our fundraising and partnership strategy going forward. So we really encourage everybody who is eligible to submit a concept, and that will really help us drive and understand the need. So the top 10 invited concept notes will then have a sort of a month or two to draft a more formal proposal, which will basically be the same content as the concept note, but obviously in a lot more detail. And again, we will have an independent process to help score and rank and make recommendations on those 10 proposals. The winning bidder will therefore be selected out of those 10. And we will do a due diligence on the winning bidder. And obviously, if the due diligence is not successful, we would go to the next bidder in the list. And then hopefully that due diligence will be a breeze. And we will then contract with the winning bidder and aim to announce the winning bidder around the 30th of April. So that's the rough timeline. I guess the key thing for everyone on this call to know is we are wanting 5-page concept notes by the 30th of January, and that is the phase that you are invited to at this point. If you don't hear from us, then unfortunately you will have to assume that you weren't successful in this first round, and we will notify the top 10 directly. We will provide 3 documents that will be made available on our website shortly after this launch event to give you a sense of what you need to do. The first is the eligibility criteria. We've kept this separate and short, so we hope that you're able to read this document before you go through the effort of writing concept notes. And then there's a much longer document that details the criteria that we will be looking for in assessing the concept notes. And then just for your support, there's an information sheet about AEF. Where do we come from? What do we think about? And that can then help you very much along the lines of what was discussed in the panel, but that can help you frame your arguments in the concept notes. So yeah, just to reiterate, this will be on our website after the launch event. Lots of questions about eligibility. So this is a summary of the eligibility criteria. We will accept proposals from individual institutions or consortia of institutions. So you're welcome to form partnerships. Those institutions can be public or private tertiary research institutions or unit centers and institutes within those larger institutions. So if you are a research institute within a broader university or a broader think tank, you are most welcome to apply. We will accept proposals from state-sponsored research institutes. So we had a lot of interest from Council for Scientific and Industrial Research organizations across Africa, non-profit think tanks who are engaged in research and coordinating research are welcome to apply. International universities who have established campuses in Africa are allowed to apply. So I guess the core thing I should emphasize here, you must be Africa-based in order to apply for this grant. Already established and newly established entities are allowed to apply. So there were a couple of questions in the chat about from institutions who have been established already and have particular challenges. You are, of course, welcome to apply, but you're also, could be a newly established organization. Not-for-profit arms of private sector entities with a clear separation of duties and track record may apply. So you may have a non-profit consulting arm that is doing work already on research and energy. You are eligible. And then civil society organizations whose focus is also on research are also allowed to apply. Who is not allowed to apply? Private for-profit companies or organizations, including consulting firms, may not apply. Government departments, regulators, or state-owned entities, including utilities, who are not research-orientated, are not allowed to apply. And then individual persons, unfortunately, may not apply. So the core of the proposal is responding to 3 needs that we would like addressed: research, training, and then the broader community of practice. So on the research side, we expect model-based research on some aspects of energy. We have kept this quite deliberately broad because only you know in your country what are the most urgent priorities for research. So as long as it's energy-based and research-based, we welcome any kind of research program. But you would obviously, in your proposal, have to describe why this research area is important to your country and where you think it would have an impact. We would also like you to conduct training. So we want to see evidence of or description of a training program. And this training program can be focused on students and practitioners, or just practitioners, one or the other. And teaching may be broadened outside the proposing institution or your country. But those are 2 sort of core components, and we should see some linkage between the research and the training entities. And then finally, the community of practice coordination. So the chart I showed you of all the different modeling needs and knowledge needs in a community. We would like to see evidence of how you would convene such a community, how you would develop it over time, and how it would then link to the broader research program. So those are the 3 core components. So we expect in your proposals to see a really solid summary of the socioeconomic context and why you think your particular research program would feed well into that context, and then the 3 components of research, teaching, and community of practice. as a guide, but by no means inclusive. These are some of the areas that you could be thinking about as research focuses for a hub, and you can focus on one or more of these issues, but you're also welcome to introduce issues that you think are relevant for your country. So capacity modeling, transitions in energy more broadly. So we could be thinking about electric vehicles and liquid fuels and those kinds of transitions, production cost modeling, demand side modeling, or other productive uses of energy. And this could be at any scale. You could be looking at productive uses of energy in agriculture, for example, or you could be looking at nationwide demand side and productive uses. Geospatial modeling, static and dynamic grid modeling, energy efficiency is obviously our first fuel. Market design and pricing is a focus area, energy access and affordability, clean cooking, and then a range of topics around data discovery, provision, and processing as they relate to energy and modeling, but also the role of AI in modeling and in data discovery. As I say, not an exclusive list, but to give you a sense of the types of topics that we would be interested in and hope to be able to support in your research programs. So in those 5 pages, this is kind of what we would expect to see. We would want to see a good description of the context, as I have already mentioned, concluding with some kind of clear problem statement and ideally some demand signals, some data to show that this is a necessary thing in your context. We would want to know what your research and training focus will be, leading out of your context and political economy analysis. We would want to see the function plans. So how are you going to address the 3 areas? What would you focus on? Who would you reach? And in particular, thinking about the teaching and community of practice convening. Specifically in the community of practice, this is where we would want to see a little bit of detail. Who would you include? How would you run those processes? And a subcomponent of that, as we mentioned earlier, is the inclusive research processes. So as I said, inclusive research has shown to be much more impactful. And so at what stages in your research process and in your community of practice will you seek insight from other users, policymakers, make sure you're answering real policymaker questions, industry, implementers, investors. Obviously, we want to see a staffing plan. Who would you staff? Do they have the skills to match your kind of plan and your research focus areas? Who would lead the research team? We would like to hear your thoughts about data and tools. What will you use? What are the data challenges you might face? A high-level budget. So we would want to see what your overall budget is across these various areas, across various allowable expenditures, which are detailed in the guidance. And just to make the point that we recognize that many of you would have to pay overheads to host. We would obviously be considering value of money throughout our analysis, but any overheads must be capped at 12%. And then we would be interested in your network role. So one of the things we would like for hubs is to help us as the AEF lead this network of hubs. And so it would be useful to reflect on how you think you can support that broader process of building hubs. Obviously, don't forget to include contact information. And if there are areas where you have gaps that you think the AEF through our partner network could support you, we would love you to identify those so that we can think about that ahead of time. A big philosophy of what we're trying to do is to, as we said, is build the capacity of African institutions. And so part of what we want is a sort of philosophy of openness. How can we build resources that can be used by other people? And so we would like you to consider open data sources, open source models that are well documented. So, you can have an incredibly complicated open source model that no one can understand because it's poorly documented. And so thinking about the broader public utility of the work that you do and the research and data tools that you develop. And of course, we would also have a preference where you are publishing peer-reviewed literature that it is published in open journals. Obviously, grey literature is also acceptable as long as it's is well is robust and is distributed widely. So that's the high-level guidance on what we would like to see from you. So as I say, 5-page concept notes due by the end of January. and the guidance is online. Eligibility criteria is clearly defined, and you are also welcome to send us any questions that you might have, and you can please send those queries to info@africanenergyfutures.org, and we will monitor that inbox as a team and make sure that we get back to you. Where there are common questions, we will then also get back to you if we think that one question is relevant to all parties, for example, and we will also then enhance the online bidding guidance documents. So in that regard, at each phase in this process, we ask you to register. So you need to register to access the bidding guidance, and once you're ready to submit, you would need to register again. And in this way, we know who is where in the process, and we're able to reach out to you if there's any additional guidance or any general question that applies to everyone. So I quickly want to also cover a couple of other things. What else is in the pipeline for AEF coming up? And there are a couple of interesting things. One thing to be thinking about is another mini call for proposals that we'll be launching early next year in partnership with the University of Maryland, ClimateWorks, and Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. Thinking a little bit more broadly about how might we apply integrated assessment models in your country context. So this will be a much shorter-term research piece, probably over a year, where a lot of support will be provided from Pacific Northwest National Labs and the University of Maryland, as well as AEF and ClimateWorks. So this is something to watch out for. We'll be launching this early next year. Watch out for it in our newsletter. But the idea is, can we start to implement some of these broader integrated assessment model frameworks in our local countries? What data challenges will we have? What kind of implementation capacity challenges will we have? Is this something that's appreciated by policymakers? So that pilot is something that is additional to be involved in, additional to the call for proposals that we're launching today. More details will be published early next year. Then things for you to do. We, the AEF, will be co-hosting with CCG, Climate Compatible Growth, the Energy Modeling Platform Africa meeting in Cape Town in April. And attached to that, we're planning on hosting a 3-day conference thinking about these kinds of issues with South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission, given that it will be in Cape Town and include many members of their broader community of practice. Unfortunately, funding is not available for you to attend, but if you are able to attend on your own finance, you're most welcome to attend. We will also be hosting one of these online sessions in February, what we call community sessions, and our next community session will be on the 4th of February and will be focused on aspects of demand-side modeling. And there we'll think about how do we think about this at a broad economic level, how do we think about this at a local level within our countries, particularly if we think about rural and agricultural demand, and start talking about some of the tools that are available for us to think through demand-side modeling. And then not an Africa Energy Futures initiative, but something that I wanted to raise to you is the International Energy Workshop is going to be hosted by the University of Cape Town in Africa this year. And so that 22nd to 24th of June, not this year, next year. And it would be wonderful to get a strong African presence. So if there are academics in the audience that are working on these issues, we would really welcome, or UCT would really welcome your strong submissions. And you can find more details on their website. So just finally, before we wrap up, is if you want to get involved in Africa Energy Futures, as I said, we're a broader community, not just the research partners and research institutions, which we spent a lot about talking about today, but we also then welcome you to reach out to us if you're a policymaker and would like a hub in your country, if you're a donor and wanting to support this kind of work, but also if you're running partner programs where you think that there is an opportunity to collaborate, we would really love to hear from you. And there have already been some people dropping suggestions into the chat, which is really most welcome. So that is the detail from our side. And as I say, please do engage with us online. We are very happy to take questions through info@African Energy Futures, and we really look forward to your participation and proposals. And please do spread the word. You may also, of course, want to start building partnerships and alliances within your individual countries. I did want to mention that you are welcome to submit regional and topic level proposals, but the key concept here is that you must understand your local political context. And so if you submit for a wider region, you must demonstrate that you understand the political processes and political context for that wider region. And likewise, if you are submitting on a particular topic, say energy efficiency or productive uses of energy, you would need to demonstrate that you have the sort of political and stakeholder reach to build a hub around that particular topic. So we're anticipating most of the proposals will be country level, but you are also welcome to submit proposals at a regional or topic level. So we are just on time, so I would like to take the opportunity to once again thank the speakers and the panelists who contributed to today. It has been a fascinating event that I've enjoyed thoroughly, and I hope that you have too. But thank you to Stephanie and Dan and Rose and Miran and Salim, and of course Cassidy, who had the hard work of shepherding the panel. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to further contact with you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.